Shabbat Shalom, good morning, everybody. We are going to get started right now because we have a little bit of a hard stop as we get closer to 10:30, 10:40, because Dr. Waxman has got to explain what he explained to all of us last night on TV. And we'll be meeting with Fox News, I believe, to kind of explain some of what he explained to all of you then. So we're going to get started on time while you're getting your bagels. It is an honor to have back with us Dr. Doug Waxman from UCLA, an unbelievable thinker when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict, Israeli politics and foreign policy, U.S.-Israel relations, American Jewry's relationship with Israel, Jewish politics and contemporary anti-Semitism. As I joked last night, not at all relevant to anything we're going through right now here in America. He's the author of numerous books, numerous articles in the news. He's been a visiting fellow at Oxford University, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Bar-Ilan University, Tel Aviv University, the Middle East Technical University in Turkey, and has also been a researcher at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. I don't want to take up any more time giving his full bio. You can get that last night because I want to welcome him back to Anshe Emet and pick up where we left off last night. So join me in welcoming Dr. Wax.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see already quite a few familiar faces from last night and some new faces as well. Hope you all got a good night's sleep and that my depressing talk last night didn't keep you up, coughing and turning. If it did, I mea culpa. But I want to continue from where I left off because I know I went somewhat over time last night and I didn't give you a chance to ask questions. So that was your homework assignment. Was to, if you had an opportunity to think about my lecture, and if you have questions. For those of you who didn't attend, you're not going to be having points starting, there's no text at the end. So before I take questions, just to give you a very, very quick summary of the main highlights, and so that way it will jog your memory and refresh your memories and bring everybody else up to speed. So basically, last night in my lecture, I discussed why the terrorist attack 2 weeks ago today, morning Simchat Torah, was so unprecedented, both for Israel and also for Hamas. And I talked quite a bit about Hamas as an organization, specifically its military wing, and how its use of violence has evolved and shifted over time, the tactics that it uses. And I emphasized that we need to understand Hamas's use of violence as strategic, as purposeful, as instrumental, and not solely as an expression of anti-Semitic hatred or genocidal hatred, although, as I said, there's Hamas ideology is certainly anti-Semitic. So I talked a bit about how Hamas's attack was a departure from previous attacks, and then how it is a challenge, therefore, to understand the reasoning behind Hamas's attack. And that led me to put out the somewhat, very scary prospect that what Hamas did on the 7th of October was just the first stage of their plan, and that the next stage is to try to draw Israel into a land invasion of Gaza. So I talked about Hamas, and I also talked about Israel. I emphasized how the attack on October the 7th was unlike anything Israel had experienced in the past. The worst terrorist attack of Israel's history, the most Israelis killed in a single day. The only time since 1948 that Israeli towns, villages, Kutzim have been overrun and captured. The not just the scale of the tragedy, over 1,400 killed, many more wounded, but the psychological trauma of what took place, and I think that will be deep and lasting. And I discussed, that how for Israelis, what compounds that psychological trauma and their anger, justified anger toward Hamas, is the anger they feel toward their own government, their own state, the feeling that they were so shocked by the seeming impotence of the Israeli army and the inability to come to their aid, and the various failures of intelligence, military failures, political failures that contributed to Hamas's ability to carry out an attack on that scale. And that specifically the fact that there was no advance warning, and obviously something like 1,500 Hamas gunmen were able to cross the border and then hold territory inside Israel for so long. So I discussed that, and then talked a bit about how Israel is responding to that. And in particular, I emphasize the shift strategically in Israel's response to Hamas from the strategy of deterrence and containment, basically trying to keep Hamas boxed in to the inside the Gaza Strip and trying to deter it from attacking Israel by periodically inflicting punishment on Hamas, by trying to hurt it so that it doesn't attack Israel for a few more years. But this is always about buying time. It was never about getting rid of Hamas. And that strategy, which is dubbed euphemistically the mowing the grass, mowing the lawn strategy, that has been proven to have been a failure. And so now Israel is kind of grasping or trying to devise a new strategy. And in the immediate aftermath of the attack, the strategy that seems to be emerging is one of regime change, right? So rather than just containment, it's about regime change. And that necessitates, by its very nature, a much broader, much longer, and much more destructive military operation, one that's going to require boots on the ground than the kinds of military operations that Israel has conducted periodically for the last decade or so. And so that was the synopsis. And then I ended with just highlighting some of the challenges that Israel, humanitarian challenges, military challenges, political challenges that Israel faces as it embarks upon what may well be a very long war. And in particular, the danger that's almost really on my mind at the moment, which is the risk of a 2 or 3 front war, particularly the risk of Israel having to fight on both its southern border and its northern border with Hezbollah, which is a even more capable foe. And so that's where I kind of brought you up to. Now, what I want to do now is, first of all, give you a chance now to think about your questions. I want to take questions, and then I also think it might be useful to look ahead a little bit and think about, what options does Israel have, right, in terms of hostages. I mentioned the hostages, but I think we can talk a bit more about that, and also just in terms of the approach it's going to take going forward. Okay, so it seems like a question.
So if the Prime Minister came up to you today or tomorrow, Waxman, we really value you in your opinion, in your strategy. What type of advice or what type of direction do you want to see to get the best possible resolution to this fight? Where do you think it should try to go from Israel? If they were talking about it, how should Israel proceed in your mind if it was up to you making the policy?
Okay, well, first, I'm very grateful it's not to me. No, but I mean that, quite seriously, because it is extremely challenging. I mean, Israel has a menu of bad choices, right? It's, and anybody who suggests that there's some sort of easy answer to this is just deluding you or deluding itself. So there are no good options, and many are bad options. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is in a very difficult position because he is under a great deal of public pressure from the Israeli public, who demand a strong and very tough response, who really want Hamas to be destroyed, which is of course entirely understandable after what they've suffered. It would be bizarre, it would be completely almost against human nature not to have that reaction. Like, we wanted a time, right? We wanted that, we want retribution. So he knows, and what's compounding the domestic pressure under his army is the fact that there's also, as I've said, a huge amount of fury directed at him personally for his own responsibility in this. So he is in a very challenging domestic situation, caught between the pressure of a very angry, very hurt, deeply wounded and traumatized and scared Israelis, who, as I said, and I want to underline this because I don't think Israelis have been in this place for a very long time. Maybe the last time was in 1973, where there's a real sense of real vulnerability. Up until for decades, Israelis have felt a degree of relative, of course, there's terrorism, there's risks, but nothing on the scale of the kind of fear and the vulnerability that they're experiencing today. And so he's under that pressure, and he has to do something about that. He has to respond to that understandable public demand. At the same time, he has the pressure from Israel's allies and understanding of the situation in the region, in the Middle East, and around the world. And so, on one hand, it's got this pressure from the Israeli public to kind of smash Hamas, basically. And there are also those within his own Likud party, I should mention, that want Israel to, and this may sound strange, they want Israel to use this moment and the international sympathies momentarily garnered in order to accomplish very far-reaching and I think very dangerous and immoral actions. And so for example, his former national security advisor, just last night, as I was following this when I came back from my talk, has put forward this idea that Israel should try to actually depopulate the Gaza Strip, to take advantage of the war to actually force Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip. And others have talked about doing the same in the West Bank, right, which is where they would like to ultimately annex. So there are these pressures as well. There are voices as well saying that now is the time to strike at Hezbollah, right? Not to not to avoid a battle with them, but actually in this moment so he has hawkish voices, very ultra hawkish, right-wing voices, saying he should go all out, right? And remember, he depends politically on the far right and when I say depends, I mean to stay out of prison. So it's not just his own political popularity. It's literally his freedom, since he's still on trial. So those are one set of effects: the pressure from the Israeli public, the pressure from his far-right ministers and far-right colleagues inside his party and among his political allies, and then he has the pressure from Israel's allies. First and foremost, of course, from the United States. Now, I mentioned last night how the Biden administration have, I think, taken an excellent approach thus far, although they're facing growing criticisms, but I think it's been the president has been very clear in his message of support for Israel and solidarity for Israel. And I said that's not just about nice, soothing words with Israeli ears. That's about signaling to Israel's adversaries that the United States will get involved and if Hezbollah or Iran were to attack. So that's like deterring those countries in particular. I think that's very important, not just in words, but also in actions of sending those nuclear aircraft carriers, battle groups to the Mediterranean, and all the other actions that the Biden administration taken. But we should also recognize that what President Biden's strategy is, vis-a-vis Prime Minister Netanyahu, it's been called, and I think it's an act, a bear, right? It's a bear, because what he's doing is basically hugging Israel so tight that he's putting himself in a position to shape and influence, to restrain their behavior, right? This is the bear. You can't. So that's, I think, it's very simple because it's public, right? It's resolute support, and that's very important. Behind the scenes, it's not. It's counseling, maybe pressuring, and trying to restrain. And because the president has accrued so much political capital in Israel right now, right? Because Israelis are so appreciative of his words and the US's actions, he's able to do that better. He's not going to get the kind of criticism that another president who might be perceived to be less pro-Israel would get. And that's allows him to do that. So what I think the United States is telling Israel are a few things. First of all, do not attack Hezbollah, right? Again, in other words, Prime Minister Bibi, don't listen to those voices. If you do that, we won't be, if you attack Hezbollah, we won't be involved. If Hezbollah attack you, we will be, right? That's number one. Number two, are you really sure you want to invade Gaza? Are you really sure you have a plan? Are you really sure that you're going to be able to actually get the job done? Right? This is what the president has said very, very publicly in the Oval Office speech, and I'm sure in sharp tones, behind the scenes. We aren't so sure you guys know what you're doing here, right? And we need to be the ones who maybe say, hold on, take a breath, right? Take a moment. Make sure you've got this right. Learn from our mistakes. Learn from what happened when we went into Afghanistan. Learn from what happened when we went into Iraq. So that's very good. So he's putting that pressure on. He's calling for, and putting the pressure on in terms of humanitarian actions. And then, of course, there's the region. And then Europeans are repeating that. British, in particular, very resolute. British Prime Minister visited Israel as well this past week. The French president did as well. So that's the general, that's Israel's allies, right? That's like, we're with you, we support you, right? We're standing by you, but be careful, right? Restrain yourself. And then there's the regional situation, right? Which is very complicated. But basically, where Israel, when describing this, Israel's allies, the countries that Israel has formal relationships with, Egypt and Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, but particularly those three, and then the Saudis, who Israel has an informal relationship, they are also saying, absolutely do not invade us, because our populations are boiling. Right, and there's big demonstrations, right? And this could become a regional war. Iran, this is the last thing we need, right? And so if you do this, all bets are off. Not that we're going to get involved, but our relationships, which have been carefully built over all of this time, the new Middle East that was beginning to that's where we're back into. Israel's going to be isolated in the region. The Arab world is in turmoil and anger over Israel's actions. So those are all the pressures he faces, right? And so it's an impossible situation to figure out what's right. And at the same time, of course, Bibi being Bibi is also always thinking about his own political interests, right? If he wasn't, he would have brought in Lapid as well, and it would establish a true national unity government. Didn't do that because Lapid, the leader of Yesh Atid, insisted that for him, as a condition to join the government, Bibi would have to get rid of the far right Itamar Ben-Gvir and so Smotrich, and he wasn't going to do that. And so that's the situation. Now, what I do think, and I would say I think Israel has every right to respond militarily to Hamas's attack, and I think it is entirely appropriate to now plan for an alternative regime in the Gaza Strip, right, and to recognize that Hamas has cannot retain power in the Gaza Strip. But I don't think a regime change is going to work. That this policy is too risky for Israel. There are two great risks, there are two great costs, and the chances of success are too slim. Not that it's not justifiable, but that it's not unfortunately feasible. If you look at the conditions in Gaza, you look at Israel, you put all of those things together, and what you see is a situation where Israel doesn't have the ability to do what, say, it doesn't have the ability, because it depends on international support. It doesn't have the ability on the ground to even be able to get rid of Hamas, so embedded in such a narrow area. So for all of those reasons, I think Israel needs to instead adopt instead of a regime change policy. Ultimately, it should follow a regime change policy. In other words, its plan should be, how can we work with our Arab allies, with the United States, and with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank to get rid of Hamas? And there's lots of things. Number one, I'll be really going to say. Number one, make sure its funding is completely cut off. Work across the board so that the organization can receive no funding, right? And that means, and much of that has come from Qatar, which is the nominally US ally. Expel their leaders from Qatar and Turkey in particular. I think the Hamas military chief and the Prime Minister of Gaza, that's effectively a state in the Gaza Strip, should be indicted for war crimes against humanity. And so the international community should, it's not just the crime against Israel and against Israelis, the crime against humanity, well, atrocities specifically. So get the international community, right, to take these kinds of, not just say it's up to Israel, and then when Israel starts to act, they start saying, well, you shouldn't do that, right? They need to be pushed to take action. And at the same time, I'm not suggesting that diplomacy and economic sanctions alone, and they have the ability, because helpfully many of the fighters who conducted those attacks were filmed, right? And so you know who they are. And so engage in a long-term, a short-term immediate counter-terrorism operation, which means going into the Gaza Strip, doesn't mean going into the Gaza Strip, but not going into the Gaza Strip to defeat Hamas and install a new government, but to go there to specifically get all of the, which is already what they're doing, the military leaders and the people who perpetrated those massacres and atrocities, and continue to, just as it was done after the Munich Games Olympic massacre, where basically they knew that the Israeli counter-terrorism would go after them. Continue to do that, right? Do not take the measures that do everything in your power to avoid Palestinian civilian casualties and a humanitarian crisis, both for moral reasons, because one life is equally valuable, but also for strategic reasons, because you've already squandered much of the international goodwill that Israel has by cutting off food, by imposing the state of siege, which is a big mistake. And if it's seen, and now Israel is seen as being the aggressor, and it's not just about what happens on college campuses and what op-ed writers are fighting, it's about how much time Israel has to conduct this operation, and how much time the United States gives Israel to conduct this operation. And so if you're not taking into consideration the importance from a legal point of view, because it's a question of Israel's international legal obligations to protect civilians, from a moral point of view, because, you know, how can you say it's okay for one innocent person to die? You know, you lose the moral high ground. And from a practical strategic point of view, because you need to retain America's support most of all, the Biden and President Biden is obviously going to be thinking about what Democrats in Congress and the Democratic Party, what Americans think, and you can see this shifting. The opinion is really shifting very quickly. So that's what I would say. So don't, you know, you've got to accept that while it's entirely justified, right? Sometimes things are justified but not wise. And this is an occasion where it is justified to get rid of Hamas, but we have to figure out a smarter strategy to do that, because just as it was justified for the United States to go into Afghanistan because of the way that the Taliban were Al-Qaeda, what we learned is, you know, these kinds of belief and important are almost impossible, and the cost is immense. And Israel, America could barely, I mean, in many ways, it brought the US power down, and it was one of, you know, worst strategic for the United States, even though it was understandable. And the same, but Israel cannot afford trillions of dollars and hundreds and tens of I think there was a question over here, and then yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, quite a one. You know, they all lie. It's not just this one. Well, I think. And I have a two-part question for you. And this is just heartbreaking. Just all across the board over there and over here, what we're seeing, division and that. Here's a two-part. One is, how do we, as citizens of America, get with our government in an international way to hold Hamas, whomever they capture, they do capture, accountable for war crimes, including current administration and the Likud party, for not just this past, but the past decade and a half. That's my first part question: how do we really get, like you mentioned, international law? There are laws, whether Putin, Ukraine, whoever fights U.S., anyone. Second part question would be regarding, I would say, the.
Can I just answer one question and come back? I think there's some other questions around.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I did first one.
So let me just answer the question about the Hamas war crimes. Yeah, so there is an international, so we have a and the state of Palestine recognized by most countries, so is a party, is a signatory to that pact, which means that it is banned by that Israel isn't. Right, although there is, you know, some countries hold universal jurisdiction, which means that, you know, Israeli general going on holiday to Spain, but it runs the risk of arrest. But I do think certainly, you know, the laws of armed conflict are universal, they apply to all. And I think there are claims of war crimes made about Hamas's war crimes are indisputable. Right, we've seen them. They're not they're not only crimes, they're also crimes against humanity. They are particularly. So that's it's case closed. It's nobody can deny that. And there's lots of precedents for that to happen. But Israel is more complicated because obviously there's a lot of dispute. Right? Like take the bombing of the hospital 2 days ago. We still don't know, right? We still don't know. They're still convicting administration, Israel, and things like that. That came from that AEMT working inspired, and it wasn't an idea strike. There are others who can do forensics, who said, actually, no, it is. We're in what's called, the Prussian military strategist Caroline Karlsbitz, called the fog of war, which means we're in the fog of war, so it's very difficult. Journalists can't verify this information, right? It's very, very dangerous for journalists. They just over the past week, so it's impossible to verify these things. And moreover, there's propaganda. So we just don't. So in terms of this, sometimes they might be true. And I've looked, previous Israeli was it Gaza Strip. They're not the kind of they're harder to determine because not when lots of the civilians, not even process. If you're trying to assassinate, destroy the entire apartment, along with the civilians in it, that is because the push value, push the equation, right? But it means that if you're not taking every possible precaution to protect civilians, that's I'm not sitting on the computer screen, right, making these decisions, and we don't know all the intelligence. So we can only probably know on the Israeli side, because they do have military lawyers who are checking these targets in and making these decisions. But it does seem that in this case, war, unlike previous ones, Israel targeting has been less discriminate. I mean, they haven't used honest, they don't explode, they just make it like that, and that alerts the residents of the building to leave. That's Israeli Air Force using this time, and it's much broader. They said it's open. With very many that we've ever done. So it might turn out, and I think we have to think, certainly, I think, some of the kinds of behavior on specific war crime claims, which are specific action, we just so I will say that with us, it's indisputable, it's undeniable, and they should be held. And with Israel, is a party to the ICC, so they're not going to submit to ICC jurisdiction. But yes, I think ultimately, to respond to Hamas's war crime by committing your own is wrong. It's wrong morally and it's wrong strategically. And I say that with recognizing incredibly difficult it is for the Israeli army to operate in the Gaza Strip because Hamas is deliberate. It isn't to fight us in the open, but it is to use to fight in civilian neighborhoods, to use hospitals and schools and for weapons depots. It makes sense. You're not going to win an open battle, so they're going to do what they're going to do, and that places an impossible burden on the Israeli army in responding to this. Right? So I kind of think that somebody is holding, it's like somebody robs a bank and takes hostage. Now, you don't, if you want to respond to the attacker, you don't shoot the hostage to get the hostage taken. Right? You've got to first of all do everything you can to protect the life. But I do think when we face the possibilities, I'm extremely stressed. Thousands of miles away, who don't have the direct fear and trauma. It's easy for, so while we may say something that I don't think is the Israeli military wants to kill civilians. I don't think that, but I do think that the emphasis that is and I think ultimately that's his interest as well as the fact. So, yeah, does everybody have a question? How did they get, so I mentioned in my that this is at least 2 years in planning and exactly where they were going, what they were doing. And one of the discoveries was from the Palestinian laborers, the day workers who were going, and well, this is one of the things that over the last couple of years, well, more than that actually, but definitely gradually Israel has been providing work permits for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to work in Israel. This was seen, again, this was not a good profession. This was seen as a way of keeping Hamas quiet, because the view of that is if the economy in Gaza is doing okay, the Palestinians got much more money working in Israel than they have in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. So very lucrative, right? Even as a labourer on a kibbutz or a construction one. And so the view was that this would help up the economy in Gaza and keep them up happy, right? And so you 20,000 Palestinians work permits to go, and in some cases to work on the kibbutz. And I'm sure that those workers provided. Now, obviously, you could say you have to bear in mind, and I'm not just saying, you have to remember that Hamas is, along with other things, a brutal dictatorship in the Gaza Strip as well. So if you're a Palestinian labor, permit you have partly because Hamas got these permits. This is the agreement between us, right, over the last number of years to keep Hamas in. They, some of them may have willingly given this information, and genuinely supported Hamas. Others may have not, they have no choice. Because, Hamas aren't exactly there to give you a choice, right? But that's the likelihood. Yes.
When you talk about review king, place somebody with no, that's a problem. But what I'm wondering is, once
Well, I was really there is a case, but it is. I mean, this government, for many reasons, obviously, most of all, I think it's bears responsibility, but also for all of the events over the last year, we live in that and for the fact proceeding as well, I think again the government's, whatever the case, the judicial reform the single-minded pursuit of even when everything is pointing, I have minds ready. Finding that democracy, but those tens this is happening. There was so and then we'll just continue. And then I'm not former convicted person convicted. That's not considered suitable. National security. You know, Ismail Smotrich, who was arrested at one point for carrying an arson during the Gaza withdrawal in 2005, and he's now in charge of all settlements. So they basically put arson, gave them boxing matches, right? Particularly those two. And I'm not, and I don't, we have to be that happens. They're responsible. But absolutely, the actions of the government and those two ministers in particular, you know, put these conditions in where that's contributed to kind of the decision to think, I will attack this. The Israeli government is very popular and all of that. So I definitely think, you know, there is, I think, you know, far right government in the worst in history. But now, you know, this is what the consequences. So yeah, I'm sure they will. I mean, the problem is that Israel doesn't have Israel's can only change governments when the government loses its majority in the Knesset, right? It's parliamentary system. And that, so therefore, one of the members of the governing coalition has to lead, right? And the government is essentially like, they're all like a lifeline. They know what if there will be new elections then, because all the opinion was big reports regarding the bloc, somebody the white wing party in the opposition as well, like the progress in the army bloc would lose an election, they wouldn't get more than 55 seats. So that means that they are going to cling on as long as they possibly can to avoid elections, because they're not going to get turned out profits. So I don't think, and I know, so unless it was maybe a passive demand, maybe they would, I can't imagine Netanyahu resigning, even though, you know, he should. Stay on until the war over, which is fair, I think. But I think it's clear that he will do anything. That basically, this is probably what they will have focuses really so much on the military security that and that there is going to be a right wing. Just like hold on to power and sniper, they may win because of this kind of, because basically public will have forgotten about it. I think the government should rule. It's so unpopular among Israelis. I mean, I'm right Israelis who you know, are just furious in the sense of dread, anger, but I don't think they're going to listen. We'll probably lose the next election. Um, wow.
Along those lines, how does this function in the U.S. Congress, particularly the Republican Party, play into or affect this situation?
I mean, you know, there is the issue of US security as well. Particularly those interceptor rockets for the Iron Dome defense system. So that's really. But I don't think it's, I mean, depends on the duration. Will be- you know, most of that American military aid is basically South Israel and Palestine. But Israel does have a strong army. It hasn't, and it has a very good defense industry. So it's not like in 1973, right, where if it hadn't been for the Israel might not have survived, right? This isn't that situation. It would be nice for Israel to get that additional aid and as interceptor rockets are important, but it's not for the Palestinians. It isn't because humanitarian. So it is a fact. More broadly, it's more just a question of the United States is increasingly unreliable. And you know, and that's a problem with Israel because part of Israel's power in the region, particularly around the world in general, is its alliance with the US, right? Because Israel has this, you know, very tight alliance with the United States, that augments Israel's. Well, I better be nice to Israel, right? So I can get a good relationship with the US. That's like Turkey's doing, right? You know, we're going to occasionally make nice with the prime minister so that the US is nice, you know, sells weapons. But so the more the US is perceived around the world as completely, basically a failed state, right? Dysfunctional, then that reduces American ability and power, that does really. And that's really what's happening in the Middle East over the last few years. The view among most countries in the region that the United States is on the way out of the region and declining in power. And so that's the backdrop for a lot of these kinds of regional developments, including the Israeli-Saudi weapon. But in short, in the war, I don't think Israel is
So what now with the Palestinians? We know that the Israelis don't want Hamas there, but who can go into Gaza and help govern? I mean,
yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I would counsel against a huge election. A kind of legitimate government in exile, if you like. And even then, that's what the United States thought they had in Iraq, right? They had the exiles, remember that? We're going to go in and we're going to welcome them. We'll leave it, it will be great. So, but to that, I mean, it does happen in some cases. Forces. You have sometimes, yes, there is a gap. There's a group waiting to, but you don't have the Palestinian Authority, right, because they would be seen as they've been out for 17 weeks. So it isn't that part of the problem. I mean, of course, there are open. And I think we need to create the conditions for, but right now, so what my bit, and the reason why I think it's because I hear in the absence of Israel having to occupy and and effectively rule, because they can't really engineer, or they'll have Palestine, or that, because Palestine, people talk about the Egyptians. So that's what needs to happen. Long process is there needs to be legitimate elections in Palestine, so that they can have a unified government with both parts of their territory, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We have a single Palestinian government effectively, and that is empowered. And that will then have legitimacy. How under the age of 60, so they never voted. So that is, but that's going to take time. You want to do elections, but I think this is part of our election. We always support Palestinian elections. The US would. Up until now, whenever the Palestinian Authority has talked about holding elections, that's been strongly discouraged by Israel and the United States. They do not want elections because of that Hamas benefit. What you need to do is you need to create circumstances where the choice before Palestinian voters is essentially perpetual. Peace and Palestine. But if you present a real choice, that there's real, and then I think Palestinians will vote for, because they don't want, most Palestinians would not want a war like that. But again, that's the thing, there has to be, it's not just that you can't just have, there is no simple military solution, much as it is nice. Right? So we have to think about, okay, how can we create a political where Hamas is removed from power? And the best way to do that would be for the Palestinians to pick him out and for an alternative, legitimate government to take power. This, it's easy to say, it's harder to do. I'll come to this in just a second. Yeah.
Ability to get to a point where there is a alternative house requires regime change. Policies.
Yes, and I think it is possible for a couple of reasons, a couple of big reasons. First of all, because of what the United government in the past few time, they anyway lost a lot of domestics. So the prior to consent, there was already all the opinion polls had already been a comparative government, second essentially government. The long-term political was about the of the party in power, which was the Labour Party. Golden was invited in, resigning immediately. Etc. And what the Israeli Parliament before 1973, just a very brief history. So that actually did offer to negotiate with it, wanted to basically get back all of the Sinai Peninsula and and the Israeli government ultimately emanated that were interested, and the overall view of the Israeli public political establishment and this American Israel supported the whole basically they prefer to keep this island than with Egypt and Israel's military strength, no matter how strong it is, eventually they're not in peace. And it's not by chance, it's not a coincidence that Hamas decided to recover its survival on the basic of it. Because what do they think? You're not in this. We can strike it. We can and strike any Muslim. Right? And that's the very same psychological message, right? That you can't defend yourself. We will figure out ways. We may not have all of your ability, just the same as Egypt and Syria communicated that as well. And the long-term consequence of that was to lead to, for example, in Israel, you had peace formed after 1973, after that, because the Israelis are saying there's no military solution, there has to be lack of peace, right? And ultimately, and Egypt back then was #1 enemy, right? That's and Saddam was considered like him. Like, so it's well, no, it wasn't seen like that. And so I do think that there's a possibility because the argument that decided the worst disaster, the worst period of history, right? So lost that kind of claim to being part of your security and it's clear that no matter what happens, the Palestinian mission will not go away. You can make peace with Emiratis, you can make it with Saudis, but this is going to Israel last years. World's forgotten about the house. The Middle East, they have to care. So I think actually there is a possibility, I'm going to try and say hopeful maybe for the first time, there is actually a possibility that there will be, and I think not just the states will maybe think about renewing heaven and supporting a diplomatic solution and but the international as well, because they've realized that they can't do this. It's finding an administration more interested in that's all they're doing, right? So the international community today, as we speak, there is an international summit taking place. Well, the Israelis aren't depending on America, but many countries are, and it just goes to show that this is back on the agenda of the international community. So there is an opportunity. I would say, well, that's the best solution, but you can't just, Palestinians are not going to do it just favor Israel. They need to be made legitimate. There needs to be a whole political involved and really ambitious steps, because these kind of piecemeal things. So I think changes. Basically, this is what happened over the last few weeks is a game changer in every respect, and that does also create openings for peace. Yes. I've always viewed, especially in presence of the stuff on the end of the time, to be essentially entrapped. It's like entrapment. So you have some idea about how that might be dealt with? I mean, imagine you somehow Hamas say still Palestinian Jordan, there's still all these settlements in West Bank, right? And most of them want to take over the whole ones. So I think when we talk about settlements, we're talking about like a more diverse population. The ideologicals actually minorities, about 8%, 70% minority. Basically, settlers, Israeli Jews who are living there, who choose to move to the West Bank and cheaper. And it's nice quality of life. Those that includes predominantly Orthodox and it's housing very expensive in Israel. So most of the new housing developments in the West. It's very different. And then you know, better in the suburbs. And so those older people, they're not ideological. They're there because they have 6, 8, 10 children and they can't find the space in Israel. Then you have a small number of secular Israelis who are living in some of the settlements bordering the line. So the majority are actually non-ideological. They're not the extremists that we see here. And they would actually leave, but the actually is they're not the ones who are leaving, because any likely Palestinian state would not incorporate most of those very, very large cities. The ones who would have to leave first are the most extreme. And they're actually growing in the last year and just now. They would not be violence. So they are local. They are, you know, a problem not just in terms of the elections, but for they are also, we see almost every day carrying out some minority and you know, violent, but there is a minority young, particularly, who are engaging in terrorism against their neighbors, trying to fight them off. And so that's a massive problem that has grown. I don't believe this is crazy that they should be, because I think so unfortunately, I think the only solution is to figure out how to actually stay in the long term in the Palestine. They don't think they want to, they care more about land Israel than the state of Israel. Right? Their attachment is to for that. Now, it was very, very hard for Palestinians to accept the executive in their state. And I mean, that is we want to, but I think it's especially, you know, we're in all of these what difficult choices, and I think ultimately having them stay not as citizens, as residents with citizenship. Residents in Israel, in citizenship in Palestine. That is maybe the only long-term solution to those things. It's very, very, very fortunately it's like that now 50, you know, decades of the Israeli government in many years, and basically What do you respect for the Levitical government? Was one of the things I noticed when I coached him. Everyone who's responsible. Everyone, the government. Today you have a minority who are not only terrorizing Palestinians, they're threatening soldiers. And they're just, you know, a really significant danger to Palestinians, to
issue. You know, to me, there's a little bit too much of a dichotomy between Israel's immediate political interests and their national security interests. And that's most acute with respect to Benjamin Netanyahu. He has a conflict of interest. I think the two aspects of him that have kept him in power and his desire to stay in power was, number one, his legal peril, and number two, his own ego and narcissism. After October 7th, his ego and narcissism have taken he's had a major narcissism injury. So he's in a weakened state. So isn't it in the interest of Israel to find an off-ramp where he essentially cops a plea?
yeah, I mean, the same thing, I know my answer very long, so quick, yes. Yes. Yes, I think that would be, I personally think that would be better to have arranged with. Because though obviously, you know, again, it's a question of difficult choices. I feel like, well, justice would be, you know, served if
It makes you feel good.
yeah, but at the end of the day, how do you- very dangerous. What they're willing to do, so I think ultimately, better option would be to prison. And if you we are where we are, yeah. I don't think that what can happen. But I do agree with you that would be the best. Because I think ultimately the risks to democracy of having a leader on trial and basically the whole country is hostage to their legal situation. You know, yes, I agree. Oh, okay. So,
More information is a important part of processing things that are hard. So thank you for giving us so much more information. And we look forward to hearing more from you. It's just an hour and 45 minutes. You don't have that long to wait, I promise. Thank you so much.